Hello, everyone, and welcome to Disrupt, our film screening and discussion series that features impactful documentaries and meaningful conversations about the most relevant issues of our time. My name is Bruce Roeder. I'm the founder and president of the Museum of Political Corruption. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan institution dedicated to educating and empowering the public by providing a better understanding of political corruption and encouraging solutions that promote ethics reform and honest governance. It's my honor to present to you tonight yet another in depth discussion in our film series. Shot over a 2 year period, the documentary Take It From Me offers an intimate look at how welfare reform affects the lives of four women struggling against great odds to raise themselves and their families out of poverty in New York City in the early 2000s. This Disrupt screening is a special event that the museum is presenting around its Nellie Bly Award for Investigative Reporting, an annual ceremony celebrating the courageous work of journalists who expose wrongdoing and fight for the right to be informed. This year, the Museum of Political Corruption is proud to recognize the outstanding work of Anna Wolfe of Mississippi Today. Wolfe's investigation exposed the biggest case of fraud in Mississippi government history. The case involved the mishandling of millions in federal funds intended to assist families in need. Tonight's discussion of Take It From Me honors Anna Wolfe's work by showing the true human cost of these corruptive practices and its implications in the lives of the most vulnerable Americans. I hope you've had the chance to see the film ahead of today's discussion, but here's a quick preview of Take It From Me.
New York City has 460,000 fewer people on welfare. And New York City is in better shape than it's been in for 50 years.
It gave me the biggest wake-up call when they told me I have 2 more years to find me a job.
We just want the world to know that there's another side to public assistance welfare, the whole world.
We was doing really good. And then one day comes a fire. From the fire, everything just went chaos.
I got on welfare because I lost my job.
Waitress. Yeah, because I've got like 7 years experience and I'm like 6 blocks away.
I've been looking for decent employment for a good 3 years.
You don't think your parents love you?
No.
Because I don't have an apartment, they took my kids away from me, and I don't feel that's right.
I've been there, I should know.
Take it from me.
Now, it gives me the greatest pleasure to introduce our moderator for tonight's discussion, Zoe Sullivan. Zoe Sullivan is an independent audio producer, writer, and journalist who focuses on gender, environment, and community development issues. She came to journalism after more than a decade as a community organizer. That path led her to begin producing reports for the now defunct Free Speech Radio News. In 2017, she won the BBC World Service's World Stories competition to document the experiences of feminist organizers in Argentina. Zoe has worked with the Financial Times, the Washington Post, NPR, and other outlets. For fun, Zoe enjoys playing pool, Latin dancing, and eating chocolate chip cookies made with molasses. Thank you, Zoe, for leading this conversation, and welcome to our Disrupt film series.
Thank you so much, Bruce, for that really kind introduction. And thank you to everybody who is watching. And also thanks again to the Museum of Political Corruption for making this really important conversation happen and for sponsoring this series. My name is Zoe Sullivan. I am a journalist and former community organizer. I have my own connections to the themes in this film, having worked for a number of years in a social service organization in New York City. And I would like to just take a moment to introduce some of the panelists who will be joining us today. So you have watched the film Take It From Me by Emily Abt. She was selected as one of Variety's top 10 directors to watch. This film actually came out of work that she did as a caseworker in New York City many years ago. Since then, she earned an MFA in film from Columbia University and won a Fulbright Fellowship to produce her thesis film. She's also created feature documentaries, including All of Us, which was Showtime's 2008 World AIDS Day film, and Daddy Don't Go, which was executive produced by the actors and activists Omar Epps and Malik Yoba. That film won 8 Best Documentary Awards and premiered on the Starz Network in 2017. We are also joined by Bill Nichols. Bill Nichols is the editorial director at Spotlight on Poverty and Opportunity, a nonprofit, nonpartisan site that focuses on the latest news and policy around poverty and opportunity topics. He joined Spotlight after a 35-year career in journalism as the founding managing editor of Politico. He launched Politico in 2007 in Washington, D.C., and then Politico Europe in 2015. We are also joined by Carol Burnett. Carol Burnett is the founder and executive director of the Mississippi Low-Income Child Care Initiative. That is a statewide public policy organization that works to strengthen the state's child care assistance program and to make public safety net programs work better for low-income single moms. And also joining us from the Mississippi Low-Income Child Care Initiative is Matt Williams. Matt conducts research and does policy analysis to support reforms and best practices in Mississippi's public safety net programs, and has focused on Mississippi's public workforce training and education systems, and applied a gender and race equity lens to those projects. So those are our panelists, and thank you all so much for making the time and for bringing your expertise and insight to this conversation. Just to kick off, I want to say that there are 3 basic themes that I would really like to dig into a little bit in this conversation. One is the systemic nature of poverty in the United States, which I think this film does a really fantastic job of highlighting. Another issue, which doesn't come up so much in the film, but which more recent news, I think, really brings to the forefront, is some of the grift associated with welfare reform, what's called welfare reform. And then the third thing is the misogyny that I think comes out in this film and how that impacts women and families. And obviously there is certainly a racial aspect to this as well. But to get started, Em, why don't you tell us, what prompted you? I know you were young when you did this. What made you decide that you wanted to make a movie? We can't hear you.
Okay. Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. Yes. Okay. First of all, I just want to say hello to everybody. I'm deeply honored that you've all watched this film that I made with so much love many years ago. This topic that we're exploring today is incredibly important. Obviously, there's a lot of competition for headlines right now, but the deep and pervasive poverty that impacts our families in America really needs to be pushed more to the forefront because we have so much work to do. So I'm just incredibly honored to be in all of your company today. You all are at the forefront of this really crucial work. So for me, the inspiration for this movie came from my experience as a caseworker in New York City. And Zoe, you're right. I was young, idealistic. I was just coming out of my undergraduate program. And I actually had no intentions of being a filmmaker. I was headed towards law school. I wanted to be like a civil rights attorney. But I was so struck by the experience of my clients. And I felt like I was sort of on the front lines of this incredible historical shift in terms of how we were treating our poor. And like everybody else, I was well aware of all the stereotypes around people who receive public assistance, so welfare queens and all of that sort of thing. And I just had the complete opposite experience of the mostly women that I was working with. I had deep, deep empathy for what they were going through. And I felt like there was this sort of there was this strong feeling that the poor were being blamed for their own poverty. And when I was a caseworker, I was just witnessing the exact opposite. I felt like the people, my clients, were being sort of victimized by the system, and they were unable to escape poverty because of all the structures they were dealing with. And so I felt very personally motivated to make this film because I wanted to try and dismantle some of the very damaging stereotypes around poor people, and specifically mothers who are receiving public assistance. And I just, I quit my job as a caseworker, which was not that hard to do because I was seeing a lot of mistreatment of our clients. And so I was pretty upset by that. And so I decided to pick up a camera and tell the other side of the story. And there was a lot of beginner's luck involved and good timing. I think there was a lot of curiosity on behalf of the public. People wanted to see the sort of human impact of the Personal Responsibility Act. And so it was sort of a right time, right place situation. And as you can see from the movie, it's not a fancy movie. I shot a lot of it myself. I was kind of learning by doing. But the stories are very heartfelt, and the women that I was able to film and have the deep honor to capture, they were incredible. And so I feel very blessed to have made the film, and I'm so glad that it's still useful in terms of this discussion.
Sorry, I had a moment
Okay.
of difficulty trying to unmute myself there. So yeah, thank you so much. I mean, as somebody who also worked with immigrants in New York City, I had to send people to the job center to look for work. And one of the things that was incredibly frustrating to me was that the job center only cared about placing people in dead-end jobs and had no interest in funding training or education, which would have helped people bring themselves out of poverty. And so, on that note, I wonder if maybe Carol or Matt might have something that they would like to bring in.
Yeah, I would love to share. I mean, I just want to say, the Take It From Me documentary is really powerful and very consistent with the work that we've done with single moms in poverty here in Mississippi. And, the documentary opens with, I think, some important information about the structural changes that happened in welfare, moving from AFDC, Aid to Families with Dependent Children, to the Public Responsibility Act, TANF as we know it, because the change moved from an entitlement where anybody who became eligible could receive assistance to a federal block grant to states with a capped amount of money, with a lifetime limit of the number of months that a person could receive benefits despite their continued eligibility, with work requirements, with the ability of states to add their own kinds of requirements and impediments to getting the assistance that recipients might need. And also that all of that was driven by what was the four purposes of TANF. And if you reread them now, you'll see that that whole policy was built on a wrong, erroneous, harmful idea of who welfare recipients are. But in Mississippi, our state piloted a program called Work First in 1995. So we kind of jumped ahead of TANF and got at it first. And it started in our county. We had an adult literacy program that the students in our adult literacy program were women on welfare, and they could participate under AFDC because being in the literacy program counted as meeting the participation requirements they had to meet to be on AFDC. But when Work First, which was a preliminary of TANF, went into effect, they were pushed out of adult literacy into the workforce. And of course, without basic literacy skills, the jobs they were able to get were extremely low paying. We interviewed some of the women who were impacted, and their stories track so similarly to the Take It From Me documentary. I mean, they report inconsistent application of the rules, the lack of transportation, but most troublingly, that the jobs that they were forced into were the very low-paying jobs they were trying to escape from. I mean, one of the women in our survey volunteered to be in Work First in hopes that she was going to get a higher paying job, and Work First assigned her to go back to the very job she left, trying to get a better one. And what we know, and again, it's just a wrong-headed idea of who's on welfare, the whole idea that that people have to be forced to go to work. I mean, single moms in our state, they have an incredible work history, but the problem is the jobs they have are extremely low paying. And we know what it takes to move families out of poverty. The women we interviewed, the women who are in the documentary, all let us know that what they need is jobs that pay a living wage, which often requires education and training, transportation, childcare, health insurance. And in our state, and probably in most states, I mean, the population on welfare are single moms with children. Single mom-headed families are the poorest families in our state. They face incredible gender inequity in their experience in Mississippi's workforce. And within that gender inequity, there are also racial inequities that Black women and women of color experience the worst inequities. We know that TANF has been terrifically successful at moving people off of welfare, but not out of poverty. Our state has received about $90 million a year for 26 years in welfare reform money, and yet our poverty rate hasn't declined. So these issues have been chronic throughout our state's history of implementing TANF. Right now, we only have the state-imposed requirements in TANF are so punitive and obstructive that we only have like 400 adults in the whole state on TANF in 2022, and yet hundreds of thousands of families are living in poverty. And of those families who are trying to get on TANF, our state has an over 90% decline rate in declining applicants trying to get on to TANF. And the cash assistance that we offer is only $260 a month for a family of 3. So these are chronic problems, and they impact poor single moms most heavily. And I'm really grateful to be in this conversation to talk about these important issues.
Just to make it more of a conversation, I actually want to encourage you, Bill and Matt, to unmute yourselves so that we can actually talk to each other, because I think that would be more interesting for people to listen to, and also, you know, probably we'll be able to tap into some of the insights that that all of you have. I think, speaking of the gender aspect, Bill, something I wanted to ask you about, but I'll just take a slight tangent for a moment, was one of the things that really stuck out to me in the documentary was the scene when Abby is talking about her experiences in court, where everything is being put on her, and her partner, Ed, is never held accountable for anything related to the children. And I think this seems like, I don't think that dynamic has changed in our society. So if anyone has a comment on that, that's great. But I also wanted to ask you, Bill, because you're also looking at policy level stuff. And I know that I mentioned looking at how this is really a systemic issue. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure. And nice to be with everyone. And I'm appreciative for being included. And it's a really powerful film, and was a trip down memory lane a little bit for me, because I was covering the Clinton administration, and I was actually at that press conference in the Rose Garden that you had the clip of at the beginning of the film, which I hadn't thought about in a long time. Just to follow up a little bit on what Carol said, we know what works, right? And I guess that's one of the things that I was most struck by watching the film is here, 30 years on, we know even more what works. And within the last couple of years, given the experience that we had during the pandemic and the phenomenal success of the expanded child tax credit and the impact that it had on raising families above the poverty line, we know even more what works. And yet we're still, as a body politic, unwilling to make the decisions that need to be made. I think if anything, since this film was made, the evidence is certainly more overwhelming that work requirements really don't accomplish much of anything. I think the literature is pretty uniformly agreed upon that. And I think in the field, there had been talk about what would the impact of a cash benefit like the CTC be. And we had, because of extraordinary circumstances, a real life experiment, and it proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that it works. And so what did Congress do? They didn't extend it. I think there's still some chance that could happen in the next few months, but if it does, it's probably going to be accompanied by work requirements, despite the fact that there's very little evidence that they work. So I think we're still living with this conundrum that too often poverty is termed as somehow a personal choice, and where it's really a policy choice. So that's one thing. The other thing that I was really just moving away from your question just a little bit, but something we really try to focus on at Spotlight, it's so moving to be a witness to the stories of these women, and you're just reminded in such a powerful way that these are people. These are not statistics. They're real people, and they're real people who are in circumstances that any of the five of us could be in, if the circumstances in our life were different. So that trying to, in terms of journalistic forms, continually trying to move beyond the stereotypes, trying to write about poverty in ways in which you're presenting solutions, not sad stories. Sometimes sad stories are a way to solutions, but trying to focus on what can we do to make people's lives better, and trying to upend some of these, notions that of the welfare queen, of the people, as Carol was pointing out, who somehow don't want to work, or if you work in the field for an hour, you find that exactly the opposite is true. So it's sad, I think, in a lot of ways, that no more progress has been made since the time that Em made this movie. On the other hand, I think there's even more powerful evidence on the choices that, if we would make them, could make just an incredible difference.
Yeah. Yeah, we haven't heard from you yet, Matt. So
yeah, I was going to say I'll certainly jump in, and again, I also want to say it's an honor to be part of this conversation and to be speaking with all of you. I, echo everything that has been said, and a lot of it's difficult to watch the documentary. It's a great film, but it's difficult for me because we see moms right now in our daily direct service work. We have a team of case managers who assist single moms below poverty every day in navigating through our staged child care assistance program and the rules and all the hurdles they have to get through. They're eligible, but all the bureaucracy and sort of state-imposed punitive rules a lot of time. And so we still see families in the same situation. And something that struck me from the documentary was just time and how much time it takes for people to get through what the system is supposed to promise. And then how, when they lose that time, it has such devastating consequences in their lives. And that's something that I think is really easy to take for granted when you're not in those circumstances. And again, we see it every day. And a lot of what we try to do is everything we can to expedite what it takes, what is a really long time to get a mom approved for childcare, for instance. When we have moms come to us, they don't need childcare 4 or 6 or 8 weeks from now. They need assistance right now. It's Friday, they have a job offer, they need to have stable assistance in place on Monday. And that's what we're trying to do. And it's also strikes me in the conversation so far is that we know how to get there. We know what we need to do to get there. In Mississippi, though I will say our state has recently made a couple somewhat promising moves in our TANF program. Largely, there has been a total lack of political will to really build a robust cash assistance program in Mississippi that works and that is designed to get resources in the hands of families. And in fact, in the course of my work in Mississippi at the state public policy level, TANF has become a target for really intentional really intentional attacks. One example, for instance, is in 2014, our state imposed a state law that would require applicants to TANF to take a psychometric test to determine if they're a likely drug abuser. And based on the results of this test, they then have to be referred to drug testing. And so what this policy does is, first of all, we requested the data when it first came out, and it absolutely shows that a very small, almost negligible number of people who went through all those steps were using drugs. And it is a policy that is completely rooted in this idea, this false idea of who people below poverty, who people are, who are applying for TANF. But what the policy does is it creates so many little steps that a person has to get through. And every one of those steps can totally just eviscerate the pathway to getting assistance. And that policy is not something that was put in place in Mississippi because we needed it. The evidence suggests that there was no need for it. It was a policy that was created by a public policy group way outside of Mississippi. And it was intentionally designed to erode TANF. And it has been one of a lot of policies that have done that. And unfortunately, as state advocates, we have to spend time defending what we have with TANF, as dysfunctional and broken as it seems to be, and as we know it is. But we even have to defend that from attacks. And so it's very difficult to reform in I think in a lot of states, but particularly in our context.
I wanna jump in there because I think hopefully people will be aware of the work that Anna Wolfe at Mississippi Today has done, and the welfare fraud scandal of Brett Favre and the governor and very well-connected, well-off people. And I wonder if that scandal has created an opening in Mississippi for a different kind of conversation around these programs. And, if so, what's happening? And if not, why do you think not?
Can I jump in on that?
Please do.
First of all, I want to say that, some of what Matt and I have been describing probably indicates that the problems in TANF have been chronic from its beginning. This particular current situation, I think, is just one in a long line. But you would think that such a scandal would result in an effort to try to prompt reforms. We have worked with some members of our state legislature who believe that those reforms should occur to try to identify what reforms would be most effective, to try to increase the number of families, the amount of cash assistance, the amount of funds going to childcare, et cetera. And many proposals were introduced into the last legislative session, but the supermajority of Republican legislators that we have in our legislature right now didn't have an appetite to pursue any of those reforms. And so none of them occurred. This whole scandal is taking a long time to play its way out, to see what, if anything, is going to happen at the end of the day. And there appears from the outside to be an effort to keep it out of the headlines. But I mean, I was talking about that Work First program years and years ago. I'll just say that one of the things that was a part of that design was a lot of money out of the welfare program was used to pay employers to hire employees to create some subsidized employment slots. And even though very few welfare recipients ended up in those subsidized employment slots, and in fact, some of the welfare recipients that found jobs on their own weren't allowed by Work First to take the jobs they found on their own because they wanted them to take the subsidized jobs that the program had paid for. But it's just an example of how over the entire life of this program, there has been a tendency to direct the funding to contracts with employers or politically connected entities, rather than to create a real adequate kind of cash assistance that would provide the sort of financial support that poor families need.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on that for a moment. I don't know if any of you have listened to the podcast from Marketplace called The Uncertain Hour, but their most recent season focuses on the welfare to work trap and is a really very well done, in-depth exploration of basically the grift of welfare to work. And so I highly recommend it to, everybody. Bill, I want to talk to you because, I'll come back to you in a second, Bill, then. What did you want to say?
I just want to chime in about some of the themes that are emerging. I think, Matt, I really appreciate you talking about sort of touching on the frustrations of dealing with the level of bureaucracy we're asking poor people to grapple with in order to get these measly little benefits. And I think the mental health impact of that is huge because one of the things people don't realize until they work directly with very disadvantaged people is that nobody is harder on the poor than the poor themselves. And they very much absorb this whole mistaken notion that if you're poor in this country, you kind of deserve it. It's your own fault. And the whole system really treats people that way. Whereas in the Nordic countries, the system is very kind of empathy driven. Whereas in America, it's very punitive. And to your question, Zoe, about the grift that goes on, I think that's because a lot of the organizations that are set up to help are more kind of self-interested than they are in actually helping. And this goes back to the reason that I actually was so driven to make the film in the first place. I was actually working for a for-profit company that shall remain nameless. It's still in business, but their mission was to move people off of public assistance into work. And they had a performance-based contract with the city to do this work. But they were not doing that. They were, and this mirrors national trends as well. The company was very effective at pushing people off of their, getting them off of their public assistance. But then they were not making good on their promise to find, viable employment for anybody. And that was part of the reason I left the company. I was really, really disturbed by what I felt was fraud and just gross mistreatment of our so-called clients. So a lot of false promises. So, we will find you a good, stable job and slowly wean you off your public assistance. It was completely the opposite. And I just think that the graft that we see, the level of bureaucracy that we're making poor people go through to get these little measly benefits, it's all indication of this real lack of empathy for people that struggle. And I have a related question for you all, which is this: I'm wondering why none of this struggle is reaching the headlines. We're living in this time where the woke left is completely energized, and there's so much conversation around fairness, but for some reason, this country continues to be very, very comfortable letting our poor struggle immensely, and they do sort of so in kind of silence. So that's a related question that I have for all of you. Why aren't any of the themes that you are grappling with and so valiantly committed to in your work? Why isn't that reaching those conversations? Why aren't they reaching a broader audience?
This is essentially where I wanted to. It's related to what I wanted to talk with you about a little, Bill, which is, you talked about solutions journalism. From your perspective, what role has journalism played in, in the stereotype, but also where do you see opportunities for change? And I guess something that I would also add to this is, I think there's also been a shift over the decades, because my my understanding of a lot of the Great Society programs was that the idea really was not just to give people equal opportunity, but to ensure that people actually had equal footing. So, you could not just graduate from high school, but actually get work, or, have an opportunity to have your child in a, early childhood program, so they would be able to start school and have what they needed. Anyway, I'm going on, but yeah, Bill, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a lot. Not surprisingly. I guess to answer your question directly, uh, journalism, I think, is immensely complicit in fostering these stereotypes. I do think there is some potential hope on the horizon, which I'll get to in a second. And there's no better example of that than Anna Wolfe and Mississippi Today. Obviously, we're going through this, generational change in terms of mainstream journalism outlets, where the world that I grew up in has essentially been burned to the ground by the internet. That world didn't do a good job of covering these issues, even when there was a lot of money in newsrooms. And now, let's use an example. Matt and Carol are the Mississippi experts, but I started my career in Jackson a million years ago. That newspaper, when I was there, had over 100 people in the newsroom. The last time I looked, there's maybe 10. And that's not an extreme case. None of those 10 are going to cover poverty. And back when there was 100, no one did it then. No one did it then either. So one of the reasons that I left digital journalism and came to Spotlight was concern about that, and trying to be part of a solution as these newer newsrooms are being built. The good news is they're smaller, they're not as well resourced, but they tend to be infinitely more diverse and infinitely lower to the ground in terms of really trying to develop connections to not just readers, but the communities that they cover. And I think people are beginning to understand that while racial and gender diversity in newsrooms has always been an enormous problem and continues to be one, not a bigger problem, but a significant one has been the lack of economic and socioeconomic diversity in newsroom staffs. Basically, every newsroom that I worked in, I was one of the very few who didn't go to an Ivy League school and had had any experience with the sort of issues that M deals with in this film. And that's not to say that some smart person from the New York Times can be dropped into the Mississippi Delta and not do their level best to try to capture what's happening there. But it's different if you've lived it or at least been around it. And I think people who are running newsrooms increasingly understand that parachuting folks in is not enough. You need to have a real breadth of experiences on your staff. And I'm encouraged by that. I mean, the work that Anna's done at Mississippi Today has been fantastic. There's a newsroom up the road in Memphis that, at least the last time I looked, was all Black women with a primary focus on economic opportunity and poverty. So these smaller nonprofit newsrooms have more room to move and more room to do things in a different way. And I hope to learn from the mistakes that my generation made. It's incredibly frustrating, but I do think there is some hope for the future.
Thank you for that. And I think that the other newsroom you're talking about is MLK 50. Is that right?
It is indeed.
Yeah. Yeah, just to give them a shout out.
Could I comment on that?
Yes.
I wanted to just add a couple of things. One was M was talking about the more robust safety net programs in other countries. And I just wanted to say that there's been a lot of research that I've read about that talks about how much more likely it is for there to be a robust public safety net system in a country that is more homogenous, where it is more of a, oh, that person is one of us and we want to help them, as opposed to a diverse country like ours where there is an us and them element to the undercurrent. And so, we want to help us, but not them dynamic, which is all about the racial inequity that's at play in these issues. And the other thing I wanted to say about the lack of attention to these issues is I think that because of the structural results of gerrymandering and the political consequences of having elected leadership that isn't really representative of the majority of the country, there is a political intractability about these issues. And I feel like that also contributes to the lack of interest in trying to put the headlines on this topic when it's so unlikely that any of that is going to go anywhere, given the political leadership that we have that isn't representative of the whole country.
If I can just jump into this, go ahead, Em.
No, go ahead. Oh, Em, you're muted.
I was just gonna say, Bill, go first.
Oh, okay. I'll be quick. Just to Carol's point, and I wanted to make this earlier when she was talking about what is or isn't happening in terms of the TANF fraud case. I know people are going to be watching this at different times. That there's also a very interesting gubernatorial election coming up in Mississippi as we're taping this in just a few days on Tuesday. I'm guessing Carol and Matt may be a little fatalistic on who's going to win that race. Progressives in Mississippi tend to be that way, given I think the last Democrat elected statewide was probably when I had a full head of hair. But this is a race that people seem to feel is closer than people thought it was going to be. And interestingly, one of the key issues will be Medicaid expansion. And that's one of the issues that the Democratic challenger is really using as a get out the vote tool in impoverished communities. And just for viewers who aren't aware, Mississippi is one of a handful of states that did not choose to accept the Medicaid expansion that came with Obamacare, and has gone to tremendous lengths to keep that from happening in the state, including basically rewriting the way that plebiscites or referenda would come up to make it impossible to put that before the people because it would pass. But anyway, it'll be very interesting to see what happens in Mississippi in a few days and gauge the power of that issue.
I just want to, before I turn it over to you, Em, I just want to acknowledge both Carol and Bill's comments, which I think really point to structural intentional political issues that play out then in people's lives on a daily basis. And I think both, and I think what you're saying both has a positive and a negative. So there's the gerrymandering, which I think is extremely problematic because it does lead to lack of real representation. But what I hear you saying, Bill, is that on the other side of the coin, there is an issue that people embrace across, racial and class lines, which is the Medicaid expansion. And so, I think that often poverty issues can be very disheartening and people can feel very powerless. And I think that there are issues that really bring people together and that can be powerful forces for change if you focus on them. So that's all I wanted to say. So Em.
Yeah, I think there's a consensus emerging, and I think we're all in agreement that it's just a very sad state of affairs that poverty in America is just not making the headlines at all. And so I have a question for all of you, which is that, we saw so much energy around, and rightfully so, around the murder of George Floyd. And Black Lives Matter has been able to really kind of harness the power of social media to, really get its message across. But for some reason, there's been, just complete kind of apathy around the sort of persistent racial wealth gap in the country, and just, very persistent poverty among single mothers, and, all of the crucial work that you guys are doing on the front lines is just, it's just not sexy. People just aren't talking about it. And I'm curious how you all feel about things like baby bonds and reparations and other kind of policy ideas that are aimed at addressing poverty. Because TANF, I mean, it's like you said, Matt, I mean, the little support that's being given is just so difficult for people to acquire that that's why the welfare rolls have dropped, because poor people are like, fine, we get it. Like, you don't want us to have this support, and it's so difficult to get. We're just better off checking out of the system. But could perhaps these conversations around reparations and baby bonds and the child tax credit, could that be a way to kind of make these discussions sexy again? Because that is what's been so hugely disappointing to witness since I made this film. Like, at least I was able to make this film. PBS picked it up. There was a curiosity about, the human impact of these policies. And now I'm not even seeing that curiosity anymore. So what could we do? What will bring people back to caring about?
I just want to jump in for 1 second, because we're coming to the end of our time, and we've sort of touched on some of the questions that people asked ahead of time. So let's have a go at M's question, and then there are a couple of questions that I want to pick up from the audience questions that came in.
Can I jump in for one of the things I wanted to say is that in our world, we work on affordable childcare, and in terms of things that there has been a spotlight on, COVID shined an incredible spotlight on the need for affordable childcare. There was terrific interest. There was a lot of press curiosity. There was a ton of advocacy all across the nation. There was a big push for the funding in Build Back Better. There was so much effort to try to get a real adequately funded early childhood system put in place in response to the acknowledgement as a result of COVID about what harm it is for the country, for there not to be childcare for people who need to be at work and stay at work. And again, that effort that was so active and enthusiastic and nationwide and throughout a variety of sectors, not just your traditional childcare advocates, that still wasn't enough to get something pushed through Congress. So I don't know. I feel like again, there's a real challenge that we have with a political system that thwarts democracy. And Bill, just to say in response to what you said about the encouraging response around Medicaid expansion in Mississippi. I mean, there's been incredible polling by Mississippi Today, where Anna Wolfe works, that shows that the incredible majority of Mississippians support the issues that the Democratic candidate represents and has made high priority in his campaign. But there is also a very large number of Republicans who, even though they prefer those issues, and they don't even like the Republican candidate who's running that is thwarting those issues, they still won't vote for somebody unless there's an R by the name.
If I can jump in there just on childcare, I did an interview actually last week with someone to talk about our neighbor to the north. Canada has implemented, I think it's been like 10 years ago, but they have what they call $10 a day childcare. It's not actually $10 a day, but they've poured money into a national system to try to at least first prop up providers and bring costs down that way. And they've seen some pretty dramatic results. But in the course of this interview, I was saying, well, why can't we do that here? And there are some lessons we can learn from Canada, but one of them is, as this guy said, there's not an AARP for parents in the United States. You know, there's not one in Canada, but they did a very good job of organizing. But there's not a body that represents the people that we're talking about and organizes them and helps brings those messages forward. And I was really struck by that. There's not one for kids either. But I 100% agree with Carol. If there's not going to be childcare legislation after what we've gone through the last 3 years, and now the money that was put into the system has now lapsed and is, going away very rapidly, it will never happen. And I also thought about that in watching M's film. What a difference. That was a long time ago, but my God, what a difference that would have made in the lives of all of those women if there was some sort of national system where at least that was something they didn't have to worry about. It makes looking for employment like it's a completely different process if you have reliable childcare.
I want to stay on this theme of what are the solutions, and on the childcare issue. I think, when we hear about World War II, we know that women went to factories, but we don't often hear about the childcare system that was set up so that women could take those jobs. And so I would like to think that it is possible for some significant childcare program to happen. I don't know if it would be national or state or what, but we've done it in the past, right? I guess the question that comes up for me, because Carol, you were saying, many of the people who you see not necessarily supporting these policies want to vote Republican. And we're heading into another presidential election. And one of the things that I see as really challenging is this very partisan divide and this sort of demonization of people with different political affiliations. And I wonder, what are some of the solutions around that relate to these issues, right? Because,
Yeah, I would say one of the things that we have had some success with here in Mississippi in this context is to frame the need for childcare around what needs to happen in order to allow more parents to enter the workforce. A lot of the leadership is very concerned about increasing Mississippi's labor participation rate and getting more people into jobs, and talking about making childcare more affordable. I mean, recently, a couple of things have happened in our state that were very promising developments. One was the state eliminated a requirement that in the child care assistance program, single parents had been required to cooperate with child support enforcement before they could qualify to get child care assistance. The state has removed that requirement, and since May, 3,500 moms that couldn't have gotten child care otherwise have received child care. And in addition, we've recently heard that our state has decided, and perhaps in the wake of the loss of COVID funds, but our state has decided to transfer 30% of our state's TANF grant from TANF into the Child Care Development Fund program, which is the Child Care Subsidy Program, which is going to increase the amount of funding there so that our state will be able to serve a much larger number of eligible children at a moment when their continued service might be in jeopardy as a result of the loss of those COVID funds. And so those are some examples of how talking about child care assistance, the need for child care support, the need for affordable child care can be framed as a workforce support as opposed to a public safety net program. And I think those might be some suggested directions in answer to your question.
We have also seen, and I know we're low on time, so I'll try to be brief, at the national level, and a big part of what Spotlight tries to do is to be a safe space for conversation between the two parties on these sorts of topics, and at least try to broker conversations. But in the wake of the striking down of Roe v. Wade, I think you have seen more of a willingness among some on the Republican side to be open to the same as Carol is referring, sort of pro-family, pro-work type policies. I think childcare is one of them. There are actually some bipartisan conversations right now on paid leave. Those would not result in legislation that probably any of the five of us would want to see, but it would be better than the status quo. So I think there is a political opening there that has not translated to the presidential primary race yet. But at least on the Hill, there are more conversations than there were a few years ago.
I want to, we do need to wrap up. So I just want to ask, each of you for your final thoughts, really.
I can do mine in a question. Em, I wanted to ask you, are you still in touch with any of these women?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Well, tell us where they are. Knowing how long ago it was shot, I was fascinated to know how they're doing.
Okay, I'll start with the disappointing news first, which is that I totally lost touch with Teresa very soon after during the production of the film. So I don't know what's going on with her. And as I get older, I realize her story and her dealing with her son's mental illness is very important, especially when you think about our homeless population, how many of them are struggling with mental health issues and stuff. But that's the non-update on Teresa. Same with Valentina. I was very, very close with Valentina. I've really tried to track her down, but I've lost touch with her as well, which is really disappointing to me. I love Valentina. She's still so in my heart. And she changed her number. I left New York. I haven't been in touch with her. Ioka, I'm still very much in touch with. She moved to Atlanta. She and Louis sadly separated, but she moved to Atlanta. She started a company training nurses. She was a nurse in the movie, and oh my gosh, I love her story. I mean, she was, as you saw in the film, always very, very motivated. And she rightly so was like, I'm leaving this system in the dust. I'm going to figure it out for myself. And public assistance never helped her in any way, but she figured it out. And she's doing really well in Atlanta. It also took her leaving New York, which I think New York is a tough town. Really hard place to be poor. And so she did much better in the Atlanta area. And then Abby has also left New York. She lives in Connecticut now. She had a couple more children, which made her situation even more challenging in certain ways. I think Abby was always looking for a stable romantic relationship. This is a woman who really wanted to find love and have a partner. And so I think that was part of why she kept kind of building her family. But she has very much continued to struggle financially. But she's in a stable place, and her kids are older now, so she's finding a little more space to kind of improve her own life. So that's the update. Yeah. And should I'll let other people go first in terms of looking forward.
I would just say we've got an awful lot of work to do.
I just wanted to say I still a lot of work to do. And, we given that this conversation also includes Anna Wolfe's work, we've collaborated with Anna over the years. We did a report in 2017 where we, for the first time, went back as far as we could go with state administrative data, and we pointed to how few people were getting approved for TANF. We pointed to how much TANF funding the state was holding on to and not spending down on any anti-poverty measures. And we pointed to a lot of information that suggested TANF is not really a safety net. It's and if it ever was, it's shrinking or eroding. But what I would leave saying is that actually in that 2017 report, anecdotally, one of the first times I went and met with Anna Wolfe was back in 2017. And it's a lot of our conversations centered around some data in the report that I had included that I got from the state through a records request that was basically just totally made up. I did the reverse math and the numbers of people being served and how much was being spent. It was just all made up. And so Anna, her reaction to that was like, how can this be? And we just sat there and, sort of shared a lot. But I really think where we need to go is looking at programs like SNAP, where in my state, we have hundreds of thousands of people below poverty, and SNAP reaches hundreds of thousands of people. And that is because there are, at the federal level, still guardrails in place and still limits on what a state like ours can impose based on this ideology of who deserves public assistance and who doesn't, which is very much linked to gender and race and our state's history. And it's like this in a lot of states, I know. But with TANF, it feels like those guardrails are so absent and that the purposes of TANF are so broad that until we really do something at the federal level to ensure that TANF can function as part of the safety net and as an anti-poverty tool, I think we're going to keep seeing in our state intentional efforts to erode it. Because I want to just leave with saying, in our conversations, my interviews with single moms, they're being actively discouraged at the county level in Mississippi to even apply for TANF nowadays. Yeah. And in my conversations with policymakers in Mississippi, there are absolutely policymakers who do not think a world with TANF needs to exist. And so that is what I want to leave this conversation. We have a lot of work to be done, and a lot needs to be done at the big picture structural level, and approaching these programs with empathy. I think that's an awesome theme, and I return to that often.
Great, thank you, Matt. And briefly, you had some forward-looking thoughts, so please share those.
First of all, I just want to say that I'm so in awe of the really important good work that all of you are doing, and I'm very, very grateful for that. And I think Matt's right that this needs to be explored or improved at the federal level, for sure. My most recent film is about a woman who runs for mayor in Oakland. And I personally feel that, while we're discussing all these issues, I feel like women politicians are the ones who will hopefully really sort of create some energy around these very important policy changes that need to happen. So that's my kind of concluding thought, like let's get more women in office to try and push some of these issues to the forefront.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Em, for sharing your incredible film with us, and Matt and Carol for sharing your expertise, and Bill, both your experience in journalism and your poverty work. So thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Zoe. And a huge thank you to our incredible panelists, filmmaker Emily Apt, Carol Burnett, Matt Williams, and Bill Nichols, for an amazing discussion tonight. And thank you, our audience, for tuning in today and following this discussion. Just a reminder that our Nellie Bly Award ceremony is taking place on Tuesday, November 14th at WAMC's Theater in Albany, New York. I hope to see you there. And for those of you who are not able to attend in person, we'll have a video of this event posted here on YouTube soon. So subscribe to our channel to be notified about all our events and special programming. Thank you, and see you soon.